So I wrote most of this like maybe 3/4 before Tokunika was out, and I have a couple of these where it's like, yeah, there's ideas I have or something, and it's they're just in my recording thing. It's nothing to do with it, and it's probably things I'm gonna be putting out. Like let's say, in I think next month I'm gonna be reading like the Steins Gates phenogram or whatever, which is not something I want to write about, and so it'll be like a month of nothing. So I was like, oh, I'll put it over here, right? And yeah, it'll be like a shorter thing, and sometimes it'll be like, oh, here's a game I liked, or here's an idea I liked from a game or whatever. But for this time, it's gonna be about Kirari. It's not really review, and there might be some spoilers here and there. Well, there will especially be spoilers by the end, but it's more on how it made me feel and what it's about than what, like, oh, what's the structure and how it's, if it's well written or not. Here's the pace. It's none of that. It's just how I felt. It's mainly me shooting the shit on why I like it so much. While it's just, if you see it through my list, like, oh, why is it in like a B or an 8? And generally, I feel like I'm too lean on it, and it should be like a 7. The reason why I started with this one, outside of how important it was to me, is just because it's a decent segue in how I score things. Because generally people consider 7 as an average, and it's like, oh man, this guy's such an asshole, how did he give this a 6? When really the only time I'd be wary of something that I put out is if it's like under a 5. I actually got a lot of 5s and 6s that I actually would recommend to people. It's just either the pacing's iffy, or there's sections that I feel out of place, or if it just overall shits the bed here and there. It might be that the idea or the premise was good, but I didn't find it well written, even outside of the pacing. There's a lot of crap I can go into about the scoring, but it's not really the point of this one, so I'm just skipping over it. Actually, I think I wrote about it. Yeah, whatever. There's still some bias to the rating, but I try to cut that off unless it's beneficial to the experience. There are easier examples to use than Kirari, like by Tetsu, but basically if you enter the VN that has specific themes and it portrays them well enough and it resonates with your own experience or hobbies, then it warrants a bias boost. For Kirari's case, it's if you're like a fan of punk and if you're just young and trying to find yourself. Bonus points if you're just down on your luck when you read this. And that was basically me back then. I read it around 2012 or 13, and a bunch of shit happened to me, but I kind of got myself back and running after like 2 or 3 months after finishing this one. In terms of sentimentality and personal shit, this is like my highest rated VN, and honestly it was really important to me. So basically it just resonated with me and what I was going through, and it just was a lucky, like, in the right time in the right place type of thing. So it's more of a practice of knowing how to dissociate what's your favorite and what's the best. An obvious statement that honestly trips people more often than it should. Anyways, I think the first thing I have to say is that you don't really need to know any prior know-how on punk or to even enjoy this title. Each generation has their own popular punk band anyway, like the Ramones or the Clash, and in the 90s and 2000s like Green Day, and I think Offspring was still happening here and there. There's Mistress more back then. There's Rise Against as one of my personal favorites. Either way, it doesn't really matter because it's kind of asinine to try to pinpoint what is and what isn't punk, and it's like a thing you either grow out of trying to classify things. It's like, yeah, it's just fine, everything's fun, because it's more like it's just a relative attitude than anything else. Patti Smith is considered punk somehow, even though she herself doesn't really think so. From what I remember, Kurt Cobain still held himself as a punk band, even though somebody slapped a grunge label on him and it just stuck. Really, punk's just punk, and if someone like Mark Wood shows up in a random underground punk venue with electric violin, well, that shit's pretty punk to me anyway. And that's kind of one of the points of this VN. But if I had to point to a band that makes me remember about Kirari, what their vocals are and their tracks are, it'd probably be like Against Me, specifically the White Crosses or the Transgender Dysphoria Blues albums, right? There has to be better examples, but I'm like slightly below surface knowledge in the iceberg principle crap, mainly because there's subgenres that I don't like and I don't want to listen to, and I dabbled more to power metal around that time anyway, and I'm kind of still there. So your protagonist called Shikanosuke dropped out of his tennis club, got dumped right after, and just kept on trucking along. At this point, you'll notice that the way it's written is kind of funky, but it's written in a semi-way that he's narrating it all, and it becomes like kind of charming, even though that itself becomes not the case by like a quarter way through up to the end, where it just sounds like a normal VN at that point. But the funny thing is you don't really start there. The VN starts in the venue where Star Generation is playing. The protagonist is kind of nonchalant about it until the music starts blaring and he's like, holy shit, this is rad. You see this scene again in like an hour with more context. By then you get introduced to the other main character, Kirari. She works with them and she shines like no other, to the point where everybody eventually gravitates towards her. She's also dirt poor. Anyways, you fast forward a bit and they're basically ghost members of this literature club from what I remember, and they got to do something for this culture festival. So inspired by the venue, they make a band with the rest of the cast, and the MC gets a rinky-dink bass from his tennis friend Murakami, who's really the one that's super into punk. The two remaining characters are Chie, the childhood friend, and Serena, the sickly rich girl. They're all pretty shit at it, but they get help from Kenta, one of the guitarists from Star Generation. I remember one scene where he makes them play in front of some grocery store and he has to pretend that he's the best or he gets crushed by embarrassment. Shit was pretty funny. And I think that scene shows a lot of what I like about Overdrive. They just hit different. A lot of it is just them going through parts of punk and basically rewiring their brain to not be overly considerate of everybody and just doing what they want. I think there was a phase where they thought just cursing up a storm would make them punk and the others just looked at them weird. Anyways, the festival starts. I think Shikanosuke was forced to cross-dress just to make it an all-girl band or something, but everybody just liked their performance, and I think it was like Sister uploaded it, but either way they started getting attention from the internet and they just did a summer trip / tour around the area. And that's basically the gist of it. The cast goes through a lot of hijinks with new characters along the way, learning how shit is done, how to do the venues, how to do the tickets, blah blah blah, how to perform live. Then they have to make an arena for it. It's all at least fun to read. And I mentioned Patti Smith before, and I kind of get the same energy from Kirari. She doesn't really care about the preconceived notions and just does what she wants to do. In one final concert, she starts playing a new song that's basically too poppy, and the people are kind of jeering at her. And it's like, oh, fuck you, that's not punk. And she just tells them to shut the fuck up, and she's gonna play what she's feeling and what she wants to play. She doesn't care. Half the audience hates it as long as it's the message she wants to portray at the moment. And they're all like, holy shit, that's rad. I think they let you do any route first, but really Kirari's route works best as the third. Honestly, I don't know how it could even work because you're just setting yourself up for like the largest impact in the Vienna and then just cruise along with 2 average routes. So I'll be skipping every route except Kirari's first route. They all kind of intermingle around family at one point or another, but I don't think I'd keep it as like a high up if Kirari's route didn't end the way it did. Not to say that the true route doesn't have its own merits, I think it's well done. It's just when I remember Kirari, I remember the last 10 minutes of the first Kirari route. Well, that's not really true. It was like 10 minutes and then like an hour skip and then like another 20 minutes, and that was the amazing one, and then another skip and then like the last 5 minutes or so we're like, oh shit, this is rad. So basically the road trip ended. Shikanosuke and Kirari are going out at this point. Turns out she's going to be pimped out because her dad's in debt. It's been a while, but I think she knew that was going to happen, so it brings up the mentality of seeming cheerful even though shit's happening to them. The day before it happens, the dad just burns down the house while everybody's sleeping. Kirari gets sent to the hospital but dies when talking to Shinosuke during like the whole... It's that drama shit, right? You know, it's typical. I think it was done fine, but it's not going to be for everyone. And if it was just that, I'd like it, but I wouldn't have it as one of my favorites. It actually goes on for at least 2 more hours, I think maybe 3 to 4. So after that, Shikanosuke's life just spirals down the drain. Flunks high school but joins Murakami's band. And some of the people that he's met throughout the tour, they're not doing great. I mean, they have fans and people like them, but it's not like they're getting enough support for that lifestyle, and they generally have to do part-time work to just compensate their work and for the tickets and all that. Basically, he's contemplating about just quitting the band, and then he randomly just goes home one night and sees Kirari. Figures out it's an illusion, but she kept on showing up, and it led to the final rendezvous at the school. I'm skipping all that since I can't do it justice. Alongside it'd be a longer ass piece. I'll probably spend like 10 minutes on it if I wanted to, and it's not supposed to be this long, right? It leads him to accept what's going on and that things will finally get better for him. He starts up the band again, makes a new song that's based on some old recording of Kirari's humming. He sees a couple of old friends along the way for his next live. He goes through what's needed to be fixed, what relations need to be resolved, and back to, actually living and finding what's next in line for her. And that's it. That's just the route. There's no grandiose magic aspect. There's no time travel, no hidden antagonist that plotted against him. It's just a person accepting the cards he was dealt with and just taking his next step. It's not the only title that does it, and it's not even the first one I've read that had that, considering this was like maybe my 60th or 65th VN I've read. I just read it at the right time in my life, and I was grateful that this existed. All in all, this is one of my favorite titles from Overdrive. It's probably my favorite of the trio, or even if you count Bokuten, but I really don't. A lot of these titles felt very charming to me because it's more like they don't feel polished. They feel like something that's like, oh, you read it, you had a lot of fun. You understand what they're going for, what their emotions are going for. And you understand that it's like, well, it's just like conversing with a person instead of like having a polished thing. It's like, this is a marketable piece or marketable product to sell. This one's like, here's the experience I want. I went through this, or this is something I thought of and this is how I wrote it, and here we go. And I had a lot of fun with it. It's what I liked. It's really sad that I think Overdrive's done at this point. I still have to fan this and like the other combination to read, and I'll read it eventually. And it's one of those things like I'm piecing it out because after those are done, I have nothing else from this thing. And it's like, it's one of my favorite freaking brands and I can't read it anymore.